Hey, everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we also discuss the merits or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
How are you, Zach?
You know what? I'm doing all right.
Good.
But I had a bit of an existential crisis. Let me tell you why.
Say more.
Dude, we're at the, basically tail end of season 7.
I know.
We only got a few more weeks left. There was a Reddit thread today, where did 2025 go?
2024?
Yeah, that's what I said, right?
Yeah, definitely.
For real, though, I'm like, whoa, okay.
I know it's cliche, and, but seriously, where did the year go?
Season 7, I feel like we just cracked it open.
Yes. We got the new art. We got excited about that.
That all feels like forever ago.
New lineup, kind of new format, sort of.
Yeah.
No.
All that stuff
we did 11 months ago.
We bought that building downtown.
Yes.
Converted it into a studio.
It's pretty great.
Yeah, that rules. So thanks, folks, for joining us for the ride.
The Anthony Cumia studio.
Oh, that's funny. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to elaborate on that. But anyways, folks, we are back at it. We are here. We're closing out the year. We've only got a few more weeks left. And anyways, therefore, I thought it appropriate, like I said earlier, I forgot what the topic was, but it was the transition of fall to winter, life to death. Oh. Thought, you know what? We're coming to the close of season 7.
Okay.
Obviously.
Much like the close of our lives.
Yeah. I'm expecting hundreds of more seasons all around.
Yeah.
But that being said, we really ought to talk about what I think is probably my favorite topic. NDEs, death, consciousness after life. And, I don't want to hype this up too much before we get in, but I was telling you a minute before we hit record.
I was like, do you want me to hype it up?
I was like, dude, I found the perfect book to talk about this stuff. And, the thing is, when you look into paranormal type topics or conspiracy theories, we've said it a million times, we'll say it a million more times, folks. The hardest thing is the source material. And, I know, hey, look, we can go check a Wikipedia page, we can go read news articles, we can read books, we can look at all this stuff every once in a while. And, in fact, Tim has the books with the cover art to prove it.
Oh, right? Yeah.
They always look crazy, but every once in a while, one comes across the old crackpot desk, my Libby feed for the local library, rears its beautiful head, and I go, oh, Jesus, this is actually a good book. So I am very excited today to talk about a book I just finished. It's called The Science of Near-Death Experiences. Now, I'm sure you're saying, hey, Zach, haven't you covered, basically the science of near-death experiences before? Yeah, I kind of have. But also, it's still my favorite topic. And also, I keep learning new things. Yeah. And also, I found the perfect book.
Good for you.
This is what's crazy about this book. So, like I said, it's called The Science of Near-Death Experiences. It's written by a man named Dr. John Hagan III. So, that's right, folks. He's a physician. Mm-hmm. But here's what's interesting about this book. Every NDE account, save for just a few at the end, are all NDEs experienced by actual physicians.
Really?
Yeah, they're all medical doctors that have had legitimate NDE experiences.
Oh my gosh.
And so each chapter is written by a different doctor.
Oh my gosh.
And then Dr. John Hagan brings in the science around it. It's just super compelling, and it's just easy to read too.
It's not an academic sort of
it's one level below academic book.
There's still footnotes, but they're not too distracting.
Yeah, there's 20 million. So you can get through it. It's really interesting, and I'm really excited. And also I found a few other kind of interesting future topic ideas related to some of this stuff.
That's great.
Yeah,
nice.
So I'm excited to jump in, but like I said, there's just a lot of content to it. The approach is really a survey course, so they just get into all the different studies that have been done. And so I'm here to kind of put the definitive stamp on the science surrounding NDEs and share some absolutely unbelievable stories. Yeah. But because they're told by doctors, I'm inclined to believe them 110%.
Doctors don't lie. At least 4 out of 5 of them don't lie.
It's literally impossible for a doctor to lie, is what I'm trying to say here. So anyways, but this is what's interesting, too, because I'll kind of start it out by saying, I hadn't realized that, in fact, and this came up in the book, the whole NDE label, let's just say, or phenomena, if you want to call it that, that term actually wasn't coined until 1975.
Oh.
It was a Dr. Raymond Moody who brought the term near-death experience to life. I didn't actually try that. That just happened. So I don't know what they called this before.
That was my follow-up.
I don't know. Like, I just...
Close to death happening.
It's just, Timu NDE. I have no idea. Nonetheless, that was just kind of overall interesting, but people had, of course, been observing this phenomena of, you see, let's just say a life review, you might see a being of light, you might experience this dark tunnel that then leads to light. Like, all these experiences had been talked about and probably to some degree written about, but there hadn't been any real science around it.
Yeah.
And then where it gets really interesting is this book did synthesize some of the results of these larger global studies, and I'll share some of the stats because I find this stuff utterly fascinating.
Oh, interesting.
So there was an analysis of NDEs among critically ill patients in 9 different studies across 4 different countries, and the average estimate was that there's about 10 to 20% of people that go through this experience and experience an NDE. So in other words, you're at the end of life or you're going through a traumatic event, anywhere depending on kind of, how they're measuring it, could happen to 10 to 20% of the population. So
interesting.
Yeah. So specifically, a Dutch study that was done over the course of part of the mid-'80s was around 17% of people had experienced this. So I find that fascinating because it's not 100%. Mm-hmm. It ain't even an overwhelming majority. In fact, it's actually a subset, right?
But it's a significant amount.
Yeah, it's not 1 or 2 cases out of 500.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We'll just say 20% to kind of keep the math simple. But also, this book brought up a good point, and I hadn't really thought about this, but partly this is due to the fact that resuscitation techniques have gotten better.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it only makes sense, right? A couple hundred years ago, you've got pneumonia, you're on death's door.
You ain't coming back.
Precisely, right? Now, science, medicine, everything's advanced. People are coming back from the dead.
Interesting. Why did I never put that together?
Ditto.
Okay, no, yeah, cool.
It almost makes you wonder, too, if we will start to hear more about this in the future as science continues to get better. Who knows? But let's talk about some of these numbers specifically, because this kind of I think directionally gives you some sense of what to expect if you are going to experience something like this. So this was there was a famous Dutch study in the mid to late 80s. They were looking at patients who all experienced essentially heart attacks, people that had died and come back from beyond the veil, basically. Here's what the numbers broke down as. So 282 patients, so 82% of those studied in this Dutch study had no recollection whatsoever of what happened once they slipped beyond consciousness.
Sure.
So, 80% basically
they blacked out, they came back, they were happy.
That was it.
Okay.
So let's talk about 62 patients. So this is about 18% then that hadn't experienced. So of the 62 patients, they all had memories. 20 patients out of those 62, so 6% had some recollection, only experiencing some of the elements. So maybe they saw a being of light but didn't have a tunnel. Maybe they saw loved ones that had passed previously but didn't have the other stuff, right? Like they had some memory like, something weird happened. I can't really, get my head around it. But in fact, around 12%, so this is 42 patients in total, had a core experience, so a classic NDE. So quick recap of the numbers here, 344 people in this study specifically, 62 had memories of something, and around 42 of those had very vivid, deep experiences.
Interesting.
Yeah, so again, not a huge percentage, which I don't know how to think through that, but
were there any correlations between these people? Were they all, I don't know.
No, not at least not that anything came up in the book.
Sure. Yeah.
We'll get into some of the theories there. We'll talk about that shortly. But anyways, I found that was interesting. But here is what I find encouraging, despite these numbers being relatively low, I would say. So half of the patients that had an NDE, right? So thinking about that number of 42 patients, right, that had a core experience. Mm-hmm. Half of the patients, they were aware that they were dead and they had positive emotions.
Oh. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
30% had a tunnel experience, right? So that's this feeling of passing through this tunnel into light. They had also observed, that same 30% had observed a celestial landscape and or met with deceased loved ones.
Define celestial landscape.
I think this is, I was in a field of butterflies.
Okay.
Or perhaps maybe it is truly like seeing stars and you're out in the universe. I'm not entirely sure. Approximately 1/4 had a true out-of-body experience. So they saw their body on the ground, and then they were truly outside of it.
Yeah.
They also had communication with the light, in quotes. Wow. 13% had a life review. This is something that comes up often, like, I remember being like in my shoes as a 12-year-old.
Yep.
You know, I saw the look on my parents' faces when they told me whatever. You know, it's like a classic life review.
My life flashed before my eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ooh, listen to this. 8% experienced the presence of a border. So you go across the border, you're in the land of the dead.
Oh, 8%?
8%. Okay. There was a threshold.
Yeah.
That they knew if they crossed, they wouldn't come back.
Oh my gosh.
That's wild.
Okay.
Also, I find this interesting. It kind of comes back to your question a little bit ago, like were there any common themes or whatever. As part of this Dutch study, the length of time that this person was, let's just say, dead, or the duration of their unconsciousness, had no bearing on their experience. Whether they were dead for 2 minutes or like a week and a half, the experience was ultimately the same and felt the same.
Okay.
So that is pretty wild. Wow. So I thought, hey, to kick things off, let's talk about, some of these, or let's talk about a classic experience here. And this was an account that happened to a Dr. Jean Renee Hauschier. And this happened when she was 20 years old. So she was actually a medical student at the time. And, obviously she didn't die. So she came back, went on to become a doctor. And she talks about what she experienced. And so this will sound, I think, kind of like a classic NDE, if you will, just to kind of set the tone a little bit here. So, like I said, this Dr. Jean Renee Hauschier, she was at the age of 20 when she suddenly became very ill. Doctors didn't know what it was at first, and in terms of the story, that the diagnosis really doesn't matter. They thought it was some complication or syndrome of some sort that they couldn't quite pin down. But she started to experience paralysis, and she got incredibly sick. And when she ultimately went to the doctor, her last memory was hearing the medical staff shouting "Code Blue."
Oh God! Oh God!
She's basically dying.
Yeah.
And then now I'll read what she wrote about here. It's so interesting. She said, "I saw, as if from above and apart, emergency resuscitation efforts frantically start over my body lying on the floor. I viewed the frenetic activities around my dying body with detached interest. It was like watching a TV show. I had no need for a physical body. Matter and gravity were no longer barriers to movement. Ahead emerged a wondrous, brilliant ball of the unimaginably whitest light from which emanated perfect love and peacefulness." So pretty classic. And you hear this often when they say, okay, I looked down from above, I saw my body, and I just didn't care.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? It's like
it is.
It's like a rag doll on the floor.
Yeah. It's just that is not me anymore. I am me. That's just a bag of meat and bones.
Matter and gravity had no bearing or no barriers to movement.
I love that.
That's a really nice way to say it. It's fascinating. Listen to this, though. She goes on to say, "This radiant ball of loving light initially appeared at a distance and rapidly surrounded my soul during my journey. The light sourced from a beautiful central ball-like brilliance that far exceeded that of diamonds. I became aware that this source of transcendent light was a peaceful, living, loving thing." By the way, that's curious.
Yes.
"From it originated the most tremendous transference of pure love and acceptance far beyond human imagination. Very naturally and effortlessly, I was drawn to this living ball of loving light. As I moved toward the light, the quicker it surrounded and insinuated itself within my soul. The love source in my soul merged with the light. We became one and the same."
Wow.
This actually gets me thinking back to a different episode that we did. And folks, if you haven't listened, go back and check out Right the Polaroid Ghost.
That's a classic one. I love that episode.
You know what? I do too.
Good.
Super interesting. And the story, the gist of it was there was maybe a spirit or a ghost or something communicating with people living in a house, communicating through Polaroid cameras.
Yeah.
And they asked Wright what it was. Do you remember what he said?
No. I did.
Something like God's light.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was God's light.
What is that?
What is that, right? And so when you hear about this ball of light, and this isn't the only account where there's that energy, that light force. Wow. It is God's love, apparently.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm not sure what to do with that, but I find it incredible. And I'll keep going just a little bit further. She said, as she was drifting away from her body, she's remembering that she's only 20 years old. And she says, no, she's not ready to go. She doesn't want to, she's not ready to, go beyond the veil, if you will. And then she said she hears a voice that came out of nowhere. She said the voice wasn't male or female. It was audible and came from within this amazing living ball of lighted love. The voice surrounded me. The voice said directly to me, don't worry, it's not your time yet. Return.
Holy smokes.
Man.
Wow.
Pretty classic NDE. Another thing that kind of stands out to me in the story is, and I think this is something that I just have a hard time in my mind kind of reconciling, which is it does almost feel like everyone has like a set amount of time, like a predetermined.
Yeah.
Like, oh, no, it's not your time, or, yeah, actually, it is your time.
Yeah, good point.
That always freaked me out.
Do we even have free will?
That is the question.
Yeah, tune in next week. We'll figure out if we have free will or not.
Oh, that topic is so frustrating, too. But, okay, so we've got a ball of wondrous, loving light.
Right.
A voice, neither male nor female, but audible.
Right.
She sees her lifeless body, doesn't really care, kind of changes her mind. And then this voice is like, nope, head on back.
Yep, check in later.
Yeah. Wild stuff.
I don't know. It is so wild. It really is.
It is. And, naturally, I think, you hear a story like this and you go, all right, well, she was dead.
Right.
What caused this?
Sure. It was her subconscious filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
She once heard a story about a tunnel and a light, and she filled it all in afterwards.
Yeah, exactly, right? Now, one thing I also liked about this book was that they also had done kind of a survey overview of all the different theories related to what could be driving these NDEs.
Oh, okay.
And essentially debunked all of them. So let's go through the list.
Let's do it.
How does that sound? So, of course, hey, number one, just like you said just now, plausible hypothesis is that NDEs are products of the imagination constructed from one's personal and, of course, cultural expectations.
Yes.
So basically, hey, look, if you grow up a Christian in Minnesota or a Muslim in Iraq or Hindu in India, whatever the case is, you're influenced by your culture, by your expectations. Okay, that's totally logical.
Yeah.
Here's a problem. And this is based on actual studies, right? So individuals often report experiences that conflict with their specific religious and personal expectations of death.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so once you go across and look at all these accounts,
really?
Regardless of how you might have been raised or what your religion was or whatever the case was, it doesn't jive with what they're experiencing in the NDE.
That you should have led with that, man. That is incredible.
Yes.
So is the light and the tunnel and all that stuff, that is universal? That is just cross-cultural?
It is cross-cultural.
Wow.
And not only cross-cultural, but also cross-age groups.
Okay.
So young children that have had NDEs will experience these same exact things. They haven't been told about them or learned. Like, there's an account later, and I don't want to spoil this, but like a 4-year-old who experiences something like this. They have no preconceived notion of this, and that's what they experienced.
Okay, so if it's not that, maybe it's some sort of like the neurons in the brain are shutting down, and that's kind of like a tunnel.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
That's one of the main ones. I think most people probably hang their hats on that.
Yeah.
And this gets down to what's called neuroanatomy. And so the idea of this being different locations of the brain are responsible for kind of different perceptions, right? And they've done some studies where they can like stimulate via electrodes, one portion of the brain. And people do experience like that, I think it's called like vertical review or whatever. Like you kind of see yourself outside of your body. Ooh. But the problem is that actually as they continue to isolate all these different areas of the brain, these experiences are still consistent. Different parts of people's different brains shut down and therefore wouldn't explain kind of this universal experience.
Okay,
So they really can't pinpoint any part of the brain that would actually drive this.
Sure.
And different people have different issues as they're dying, and so therefore they can't isolate what it would be.
Fair point.
Another one, and this is kind of in the same light here, neurochemistry. So the idea that you've got different endorphins pumping through the brain, serotonin, adrenaline, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. There have been no, and I'm quoting here, empirical data or studies anywhere to support this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a good guess. You've got chemicals pumping through the brain, pumping through the body. No, they can't isolate anything.
They can't even say it was a pineal gland pumping out a whole bunch of DMT or something like that?
I guess not, yeah. I guess not.
I don't know.
Another thought, of course, that this was some sort of hallucination from, let's just say you're going in for heart surgery.
Anesthetics or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Something to kind of sedate you. Well, the issue is that actually most people experience NDEs outside of anesthesia. So that's not a cause. A couple other thoughts that I had read about, and I didn't think about this before. REM, maybe you're just in a deep sleep.
Oh, sure.
Well, a lot of these events are traumatic, not exactly a recipe for a nice nap, and therefore sleep.
I don't sleep, I dream.
Is it an REM song?
It's an REM song.
Beautiful. Gases, another thought that, hey, look, maybe we've got hypoxia. Anoxia, I believe is the term. Basically, your brain is deprived of oxygen, and therefore tripping out, if you will. What they've done is they've been able to study people like basically on their deathbeds and their brain oxygen levels. Everything's consistent and normal.
Huh.
It's not always attributed to a lack of oxygen.
Okay.
So, I mean, like, there's another kind of, I hadn't heard this theory before, that maybe the brain was like replaying your birth memory.
Sure.
So the tunnel of light being, okay, you're entering into the world, somehow your brain remembers that, and then therefore as you're exiting the world, it just replays that. I don't know why that would happen. A coda to your life, if you will. Again, this is kind of a little bit more of a fringe theory, but then apparently babies just don't have developed enough vision even to recall this type of an experience.
Yeah.
So, the experiences are consistent. How people get there varies, but they're able to isolate some of the variables, and they're able to determine that apparently, regardless of what's going on, you can still experience this.
20% can experience this.
Fair point.
And I mean, not to poke a hole in anything, because this is incredibly fascinating, and that 20% is indicative of something. But what about the 80? Why don't they have anything? Is it just that they don't remember? I mean, we have no way of proving that one way or the other.
That's honestly what I wondered too.
Or are they just bad people and they don't get to go towards the loving light or something? I mean, I don't know. Or
maybe they weren't really dying.
Oh, okay.
That's another thought that I had. This is just my thinking,
right?
Which is like, okay, maybe the people that were the 20%, let's just say, maybe they were legitimately dying, like, and in fact had died, their heart stopped. They could measure that. I don't know. I don't
I don't either. I'm looking to you for answers.
Yeah, well, if you've had an NDE, tell us, because we'd also like to know. But yeah, that 80%, it's a big number. Who knows what they experience other than maybe nothing. But anyways, let's keep rolling through a few more examples here. So this next story comes to us from a Dr. Tony, and I'll pronounce his last name, Chicoria. So Tony was in upstate New York celebrating a family reunion. It was a typical family reunion. They rented out some cabins. They're outside playing around, running around. There's kids, there's old people, whatever. Dr. Tony mentioned that it was a beautiful day outside, but there were some clouds developing, and he was outside of one of the buildings making a call from a payphone. So this was 1994, payphones everywhere. That's what you do. While he was on the phone waiting for somebody to pick up on the other end of the line, he heard a loud crack And he mentioned that he both fell backwards, but also felt like he was moving forwards. So he was struck by lightning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this might be the craziest story I've ever heard. Ready for this, dude?
Maybe.
Okay. He said, as my body was blown backwards, I felt me, quotes, move forward instead. At that moment, I heard my mother-in-law scream from the top of the stairs above me. She raced down the stairs towards me. I felt like a deer in the headlights. As she approached, I could see she was looking beyond me to my right and headed in that direction. She was oblivious to me standing there.
Oh, okay.
I turned to see where she was going. Suddenly, I realized what was going on. A motionless body was lying on the ground some 10 feet behind me. To appearances, the person was dead. To inspection, the person resembled me. To my astonishment, another look confirmed that it was me. So Dr. Tony, I mean, this is like Bruce Willis, Sixth Sense stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm here. Wait, why can't you hear me talking?
Right.
Why are you looking through me? Oh, my body's over there.
Unbelievable.
I can't believe that. It continues to get more weird, though. Listen to this. I spoke to the people around my body, but they could not see or hear me. I could see and hear everything they did and said. It suddenly occurred to me that I was thinking normal thoughts in the same mental vernacular I'd always possessed. And at that moment, I suddenly had one simple, ineloquent, and rude thought. Holy beep, I'm dead.
Yeah, you're right.
The cosmic realization of consciousness meant that my self-awareness was no longer in the lifeless body on the ground. I, whatever I was now, was capable of thought and reason. Interestingly, there was no strong emotion accompanying my apparent death. So, I mean,
I love that he's able to break down just his thought process and the nature of his thoughts and the lack of emotion.
This brings up like way bigger questions, right? Around consciousness, around like he's, hey, where is he, right? Because his body's on the ground and his consciousness is still aware.
Right.
Normal, rational thoughts. Like, what does this mean? But dude, let me keep going with this. This might be honestly some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard. So he said, seeing no point in staying with my body, my thoughts then moved to walking away. I turned and started to climb the stairs to where I knew my family still was. As I started to climb, I looked down at the stairs like I would normally do. I saw that as I reached the third stair, my legs began to dissolve. I remember being disconcerted that, by the time I reached the top of the stairs, I had lost all form entirely and instead was just a ball of energy and thought. At the top of the first flight, the stair went up and left to the second flight. Instead of bothering with the stairs, I passed through the wall into the room where everyone was. I went diagonally through the room over my wife who was painting children's faces. She had one child in front of her, one behind the person, and one to the left. I had a clear realization that my family would be fine. Dispassionately, I departed the building. Wow. Once outside the building, I was immersed in a bluish-white light that had a shimmering appearance as if I was swimming underwater in crystal-clear stream. The sunlight was penetrating through it. The visual was accompanied by a feeling of absolute love and peace. Can you believe this?
No, I'm speechless. I do believe it. I don't know what to do with it, though.
I was pulling my hair out, and I'm like, this person was a ghost.
Straight up ghost.
Just for a period of time. Like, they're walking up the stairs, watching their legs dissolve before their very eyes, because it's just like some imaginative thing. Getting to the top, I'm like, I'm just going to circumvent this door. I'll just go right through the walls. I don't know what to do with that. But let's put a bow on this story because this is also interesting, and I think it kind of relates to other themes that we hear. He said, I became ecstatic at the possibility of where I was going.
Oh.
I was aware of every moment of this experience, conscious of every millisecond, even though I could feel that time did not exist. I remember thinking, this is the greatest thing that can ever happen to anyone.
Oh, my God. That is so cool. It's incredible that he has the wherewithal to just be in the moment and be able to reflect on what he was thinking and how he was thinking and how he was moving.
And just the idea that also it's like a great experience.
Yeah.
You know, one of the common themes is people will come back and be changed for the better.
Yes.
They're like, hey, that was an awesome experience. Not like I can't wait to go back. But
right, but they're not scared of dying.
Right. Which, okay.
Yeah.
What do you do with that? But okay, so we had talked earlier about like some theories around what could be driving this stuff, and I talked about children and NDEs. So this is really super interesting. And when you think about children, obviously it's difficult because kids have wild imaginations. You know, they make stuff up. They hear grandma talk about something or watch a TV show, and it's just permanently embedded in their brain, and that's that. But they are able to isolate cases where perhaps there's no external influence, right? So I was reading on one case, and this is just weird. Listen to this. There was a 4-year-old boy. He experienced cardiac arrest during surgery. A few months after he recovered, the boy's at home, and then he was talking to his dad. Again, he's 4 years old, so he goes, "Dad, I want to go back to that park." And by the way, normally I'd say that's normal, right? A 4-year-old wants to go back to the park. We all get it.
Yep.
Except for the fact that they were coincidentally or not coincidentally living on a military base at the time. And this child was born there. It was in a foreign country.
Yeah.
They didn't have actually like
he had
kids.
never been to a park.
He had literally never been to a park before. Okay. Right. So his dad was confused, like, what's even going on? And then he was asking his child for more details. Here's what his son said. He said, you know, I want to go back to that park, the one through the tunnel, the one I went to when I was in the hospital. There was a park with lots of children and swings and things with a white fence around it. I tried to climb over the fence, but this man stopped me and said that I wasn't able to come yet, and he sent me back down the tunnel, and I was back in the hospital bed again.
Whoa. Wow.
Wow. So, I mean, all right, let's just try to be critical for a moment. Maybe a doctor or somebody took the kid out to play for some period of time or something at the hospital. But it's like they're on a military base.
Yeah.
This kid's going through heart surgery. They're probably super careful around, you know, what he's able to do and not to.
Where does he get those memories? Like, how do you come up with that unless he was there? You know?
Yeah. And to this child, I mean, he had the tunnel experience, and then he was almost in a place that made sense to him, right?
He saw no, you know, difference between, you know, the living, breathing world that we all live in and wherever this park was. It was just like, oh, I want to go back. Yeah. No big deal. Like, you go to the hospital, you go to a park, you come home.
A theme that you hear across NDE experiences is that it was more real than real.
Yes.
And so that would line up exactly with what you're saying here, which is, to this child, that whole experience was just reality.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's tough. That's wild. There was also another childhood NDE that I read about in this book, and this is actually a negative NDE. We'll talk more about these shortly here, but this was actually reported to the author in 2014 by the man was 49 at the time, but when it occurred to him, he was a child back in the mid-70s, and he said that he was actually shot in the abdomen, and the injury destroyed his spleen, shattered a rib. And he remembers now an out-of-body experience. He said he felt like he was falling backwards into a black void. And he was worried because he thought that when he would hit the bottom, it would hurt. He also became aware of what he referred to as a blob, a shapeless black cloud that at the time had edges and borders, and it was coming for him. And he said he felt very scared at the time. He was wondering why he could not hear anybody scream, and he was convinced that that is what it was like to be dead.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I never heard that before.
Well, you're going to hear a few more here because I got to talk about some of these what are called inverse NDEs.
Sure.
So we started off, we said, hey, look, overwhelming majority of people, first of all, don't experience this, but the ones that do, they're living it up, ironically.
Yeah, they're like, that's great.
Life. Yeah.
Can't wait to do that again.
Yeah. There are And let's all just go with this, folks. A small percentage, fraction of the cases that are negative NDEs. So we should talk about these.
Okay.
All right. Number 1. So this would be a true inverse NDE. It's the exact opposite. So they're going through this experience, but they don't want to leave, right? There was one, and this is an adult. He was talking about he was going horseback riding, and then he was thrown from his horse, and then he remembers floating at treetop height, watching his body on the ground, watching the medical technicians working over his body, and he was screaming, "No, no, no, this isn't right. Put me back." Nobody heard him, of course. Next, he was shooting through darkness toward a bright light. But he was panic-stricken, unable to really grasp what was happening. Then he said, "I just wanted to go back." Another person, a woman, she collapsed from hypothermia and began experiencing her entire life, right? That life review. She said she was filled with such sadness and experienced a great deal of depression afterwards.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so she maybe like saw her life review and thought, "Hey, I didn't do everything I could have or should have," or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
You know, these do happen. But I found some pretty scary ones that I thought we should probably talk
I'm all about it, man. Absolutely.
Ooh, listen to these. This is referred to as the void.
The void.
Okay, so there's, categories of this stuff that people experience.
Avoid the void.
Please. A woman in childbirth found herself abruptly flying over the hospital and into a deep, empty space. Right, so she's separated from her body. She's basically going through death, and she's flying towards an empty space. Listen to this. A group of circular entities informed her that she had never existed, that she had been allowed to imagine her life, but it was a joke. She was not real. She argued with facts, with these entities about her life and descriptions of Earth. No, they said, none of that had ever been real. This is all there ever was. And she was left alone in space.
Oh, God. That's horrifying. Like, circular creatures after you die are going to gaslight you and say you weren't even real? That's insane.
I don't like that at all.
That's worse than pitchforks and fire. Like, honestly, that is awful.
I don't like that either. And also, too, the overtones with like some of the DMT entities and stuff. Yeah. Like, are you going to a different dimension? What's going on out there? So
then, obviously, she came back and
yeah.
It's like, oh, I am real. Hooray.
Another woman, she was in childbirth and she felt herself floating on water. But at a certain point, she said it was no longer a peaceful feeling. It had become pure hell. I had become a light out in the heavens, and I was screaming, but no sound was going forth. It was worse than any nightmare. I was spinning around, and I realized that this was eternity, that this is what forever was going to be. I felt the aloneness, the emptiness of space, the vastness of the universe, except for me, a mere ball of light screaming.
Wow. That's equally terrifying.
Another woman who had attempted suicide felt herself sucked into a void. Again, these are all void experiences, right? She said, I was being drawn into this dark abyss, a tunnel or a void. I was not aware of my body as I know it. I was terrified. I felt terror. I had expected nothingness. I expected the big sleep. I expected oblivion. And I found now that I was going to be on another plane, and it frightened me. Isn't that weird? And just to terrify everybody, there's a subgroup also, very, very small percentage of the time, which are true hellish NDEs.
Really?
A man in heart failure felt himself falling into the depths of earth. At the bottom was a set of high, rusty gates, which he perceived as the gates of hell.
Oh, my God.
Panic-stricken, he managed to scramble back up to daylight.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Another woman was being escorted through a frighteningly desolate landscape and saw a group of wandering spirits. They looked lost and in pain, but her guide indicated that she was not allowed to help them.
Come on.
An atheistic university professor with an internal rupture experienced being maliciously pinched, then torn apart by malevolent beings.
Yeah.
A woman with a hemorrhage, basically, as she was dying, she experienced horrific beings with gray, gelatinous appendages grasping and clawing at me. The sounds of their guttural moaning and their indescribable stench still remain 41 years later. Oh. There was no being of light, no life review, nothing beautiful or pleasant.
Oh, wow. What? Okay, that sucks.
That does suck. And I'm going to come back to the fact that, folks, look, okay, come back to the numbers, come back to the science, come back to Earth. Okay, 80% of people have essentially no recollection of anything.
Yeah.
20% do. The vast, vast, vast majority of those people have an exceedingly pleasant experience. So it's truly a roll of the dice here. But, I mean, I don't know. Like, I get to these accounts and it's consciousness, it's questions about the afterlife, ghosts even, balls of light, maybe hell, maybe heaven, celestial planes, different dimensions. I am at a loss for what to think.
Well, what is so wild? Well, it's all wild. Let me just say that. But it is so interesting that this is being studied by academics,
Yes.
Doctors and so on and so forth. And not that makes it any more real or less real, but for people like me that like to look at the data and look at the numbers and try to find patterns, it's immeasurably helpful because you can start to see these things. Like the fact that this experience exists across cultures.
Cultures and ages.
Yeah.
Gender, it doesn't matter at this point. It's, everybody, well, not everybody, I'm sorry. Many people do experience the exact same thing or, variations on a theme, let's say. I don't know what to do with that information. So, look, I'm going to come back to this book again because there's even some more accounts and some wild stuff here. But I thought for now, I wanted to leave it there. I hated to leave it on a negative note, but I found all of that stuff so compelling, and I don't know what to do with it all.
Would you rather have no memory or like a void memory?
Clearly, no memory.
Okay. Go through all the trouble of dying and coming back, and you get no memory. Exactly. Nothing you can bring to the podcast, nothing that you can carry forward. You just avoid the void.
Yeah, how about you? Where are you at?
The void would be interesting. I don't actually want to experience it. But it would be interesting to experience something after death because at the end of the day, we're still talking about consciousness after death, right? I mean, whether it's good or bad or terrifying or somewhere in between, it does point to more evidence being that there is consciousness after you die.
Clearly, these people were, brain dead and also having coherent thoughts. So where does consciousness come from? Is it non-local, meaning is it somewhere else? And our brain is just a TV antenna, if you will? Well,
not even consciousness, but memory. Okay, you take the guy that got struck by lightning, right? Or any one of these people, they're in their floating, dead body, whatever, soul, we can call it.
I guess soul, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're in their soul, they're looking at their body, they're experiencing all this stuff, and they're remembering it, which I always thought the memories were stored somewhere in the brain. Maybe not, because the brain isn't part, you get it. So what does that mean?
What does it mean? Where are these memories stored?
What's
happening? And I'll wrap it here with a quote because, we can continue to study this stuff. And I assume as medicine advances, as science advances, all this stuff, maybe we'll have some indications as to what's going on. But there was an interesting quote here from Sir John C. Eccles, Ph.D. He was a Nobel Prize neurophysiologist, I guess, award winner. So pretty smart person here. He said, I maintain that the human mystery is incredibly demeaned by scientific reductionism, with its claim and promissory materialism to account eventually for all of the spiritual world in terms of patterns of neuronal activity. This belief must be classed as a superstition. We have to recognize that we are spiritual beings with souls existing in a spiritual world, as well as material beings with bodies and brains existing in a material world. So, a little bit of everything, I'm afraid. How do you study it? What does it all mean? Folks, if you have any answers, let us know. Write in, call in, tell us what you think. And if you've had an NDE or anybody you know or love has, tell us.
All right. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And holy smokes. If you want more of these shows, ad-free, and access to our entire catalog, you can check it out at patreon.com/crackpot podcast. Sign up there. Get it all. But before you do, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local neurophysician about our podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.